That piercing sound slicing through the 37th floor of Boston's most prestigious office building wasn't a fire alarm or emergency alert. It was something far more terrifying to the woman who controlled a $3 billion pharmaceutical empire. It was her 8-year-old daughter, and Victoria Whitmore was about to lose the most important battle of her life. The crystal vase, a $2,000 Baccarat piece, exploded against Italian marble with the finality of a gunshot. Then came the screaming, not the angry tantrum of a spoiled child, but something deeper, more primal, the sound of a little girl drowning in a world that refused to understand her language. Victoria Whitmore pressed her palms against her mahogany desk until her knuckles went white. Through her floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston Harbor stretched like a promise of escape she'd never take. But today, there would be nowhere to run, because in exactly 1 hour, Chen, a single father who cleaned office buildings for minimum wage, was about to walk into her world and prove that everything she thought she knew about her own daughter was wrong. 3 nannies had quit in 2 months. 7 behavioral specialists had declared Sophia unmanageable. The most exclusive private schools in Massachusetts had politely declined her enrollment, and Victoria, who could negotiate billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat, couldn't figure out how to help the one person who mattered most. If you're already feeling pulled into this story, hit that subscribe button now. Because what happens next will change everything you think you know about what it means to truly see someone. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers everywhere. The irony wasn't lost on Victoria that her pharmaceutical company specialized in developing treatments for neurological conditions. Yet, she remained completely helpless when it came to her own, the daughter's autism. Sophia had been diagnosed at age 4, and in the 4 years since, Victoria had thrown money at the problem like she was trying to drown it. Elite therapists, cutting-edge treatments, experimental programs that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Nothing worked. Or rather, nothing worked the way Victoria expected it to work. She wanted measurable progress, quantifiable results, a timeline for when her daughter would become what she considered normal. What she got instead was a brilliant, sensitive little girl who experienced the world so intensely that a change in routine could trigger a meltdown that lasted hours. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it had begun. In the eerie quiet that followed, Victoria heard her assistant Margaret's voice in the outer office, speaking in the careful, overly cheerful tone people used when they were trying not to panic. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry, but Mrs. Whitmore is dealing with a family emergency right now. Perhaps we could reschedule your son's interview?" If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Victoria's blood went cold. She had completely forgotten about the interview. Chen, the night janitor who cleaned the Whitmore Industries building, had requested a meeting about bringing his 12-year-old son Tommy to work with him occasionally. Something about childcare falling through and needing a temporary solution until school started. Under normal circumstances, Victoria would have delegated this to human resources, but Daniel had specifically asked to speak with her, and Margaret had mentioned that he seemed nervous about the request. Victoria had agreed to see him as a courtesy. A brief 5-minute conversation to personally approve what should have been a routine accommodation. Now, with Sophia in the middle of what appeared to be her worst meltdown yet, the timing couldn't be worse. Victoria's office door burst open without a knock. Sophia stood in the doorway, her dark hair wild, her face streaked with tears and snot. She wore the same pink dress she'd insisted on wearing every day for the past 2 weeks, now wrinkled and stained. Her hands flapped frantically at her sides, a stimming behavior that Victoria had been told to redirect. though every attempt to stop it only made things worse. "Mama, the fish are too loud," Sophia said, her voice thick with distress. "The fish in the wall are too loud, and they won't stop swimming." Victoria looked at the massive saltwater aquarium built into the wall of her office, a 200-gallon masterpiece that had cost $30,000 to install. The gentle hum of the filtration system had never bothered anyone before, but for Sophia, with her hypersensitive hearing, it might as well have been a construction site. "Sweetheart, we've talked about this," Victoria said, her voice strained with exhaustion. "The fish can't be loud. Fish don't make noise." "They do make noise," Sophia insisted, her hands flapping faster. "In my ears, in my head. They're swimming too fast. And it hurts." Margaret appeared in the doorway behind Sophia, her face apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore." She got past the new aide. "The young woman is in the bathroom crying." Another aide lost. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her failure pressing down like a physical force. When she opened them again, she saw something that stopped her cold. Standing next to Margaret in the hallway was a small, thin Asian man in a janitor's uniform. And beside him was a boy who couldn't have been older than 12. The boy was staring at Sophia with the kind of intense focus that Victoria had learned to recognize not judgment or fear, but genuine curiosity. "Mama, who is that boy?" Sophia asked, her hands gradually slowing their frantic movement. "Why is he looking at me?" Daniel Chen stepped forward slightly, his voice respectful but clear. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Whitmore. I can come back another time." "No," Victoria said quickly, then paused. She looked at her daughter, who had stopped flapping entirely, and was now studying the boy with the same intensity he was showing her. In 4 years of specialists and therapists and social workers, Victoria had rarely seen Sophia show interest in another child. "Actually, please come in," Victoria said. "Close the door behind you." Daniel hesitated, clearly uncomfortable entering the CEO's office while wearing his work uniform. The boy, Tommy, she assumed, tugged on his father's sleeve and whispered something in what sounded like Mandarin. Daniel nodded, and they stepped into the office together. Victoria gestured toward the seating area near the windows, away from her desk. "Please, sit down. I'm Victoria Whitmore, and this is my daughter Sophia." "Daniel Chen?" he replied, settling carefully on the edge of the expensive leather sofa. "This is my son, Tommy." Tommy raised his hand in a small wave. When Sophia didn't respond, he didn't seem offended or confused. Instead, he looked around the office with obvious interest, his gaze lingering on the aquarium. "The fish are beautiful," he said to Sophia directly. "But the filter is really loud, isn't it? Sometimes I can hear our neighbor's fish tank through the wall of our apartment. It sounds like a washing machine that never stops." Sophia's eyes widened. "You can hear it too?" "Oh, yeah," Tommy said, nodding seriously. "Grown-ups always say fish tanks are peaceful, but they're not quiet at all. There's the filter pump, the air bubbler, the water circulation. It's like having a small factory in the room." For the first time in weeks, Sophia smiled. It was a small smile, tentative but genuine. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. In 30 seconds, this 12-year-old boy had validated her, the daughter's experience, in a way that dozens of trained professionals had failed to do. Daniel was watching the interaction with a strange expression on his face. Not surprise, exactly, but recognition, as if he'd seen this kind of connection before. "Tommy," Daniel said gently, "why don't you tell Mrs. Whitmore about the sensory map you made for our apartment?" Tommy's face lit up. "I made a chart of all the sounds and textures and smells in every room, so I know what to expect. Like, The kitchen has the refrigerator hum and the smell of whatever Dad cooked last night, and the bathroom has the fan that rattles. It helps me prepare for how each space will feel." Sophia was staring at Tommy as if he had just spoken magic words. "You made a map of feelings?" "Sort of," Tommy said. "Would you like me to help you make one for your office? We could figure out all the sounds that bother you, and maybe find ways to make them quieter." "Could we make the fish quieter?" Sophia asked. "Hopefully." Tommy looked thoughtfully at the aquarium. "Maybe we could put some foam padding behind the tank to absorb the vibrations. Or we could ask your mom if there's a quieter filter system." Victoria found herself staring at Daniel Chen with new eyes. "Your son?" "All," she said carefully. "He seems to understand sensory sensitivities very well." Daniel's expression grew guarded. "Tommy is on the autism spectrum. High functioning, but he has his challenges. We've learned to adapt." The words hit Victoria like a revelation. Here was a single father, working as a janitor, who had somehow figured out how to help his autistic son navigate the world with confidence and creativity. Meanwhile, she had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and achieved nothing but exhaustion and desperation. "How?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you learn to help him?" "One?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Trial and error, mostly. A lot of reading. Some online support groups. We can't afford the expensive specialists, so we had to figure things out ourselves." As he spoke, Victoria noticed something else. Tommy and Sophia had moved closer together on the sofa. Tommy was showing Sophia how he used his fingers to count different sounds in the room, and she was copying his movements with intense concentration. "Mr. Chen," Victoria said suddenly, "you mentioned childcare issues. What kind of arrangement were you looking for?" "Just occasionally," Daniel said quickly. "My regular babysitter is moving away, and I haven't found a replacement yet. I was hoping Tommy could stay in the break room during my evening shifts, maybe once or twice a week, just until I can find someone reliable." Victoria looked at her daughter, who was now laughing softly at something Tommy had whispered to her. It was the first time she'd heard Sophia laugh in weeks. "Mr. Chen," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the crazy idea forming in her mind. "Would you be interested in a different arrangement?" Daniel frowned. "I'm not sure I understand." Victoria took a deep breath. She was about to make the most impulsive decision of her professional life. But for once, her instincts felt absolutely right. "I need help with Sophia," she said bluntly. "But your son just accomplished in 5 minutes what teams of specialists couldn't do in months." Daniel's eyes widened. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not qualified to handle my autistic daughter for 1 hour," Victoria interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "Just 1 hour. If you can give me 1 hour where she's as calm and engaged as she is right now, I'll pay you double your annual salary." The room went silent. Daniel stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Margaret, still hovering near the door, looked like she was witnessing a train wreck in slow motion. "I don't think you understand," Daniel said carefully. "I'm a janitor. I clean buildings. I'm not a therapist or a behavioral specialist." "No," Victoria said, standing up. "You're a father who understands what his child needs. That's something I seem to have forgotten how to be." Tommy looked up from his quiet conversation with Sophia. "Dad, Mrs. Whitmore's daughter is really smart. She just showed me how she can name every fish in the tank and remember what they ate yesterday. That's amazing." Sophia beamed at the praise, her whole face transforming. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time someone had called her daughter amazing? "Mrs. Whitmore," Daniel said gently, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't take your money for spending time with Sophia. If Tommy can help her feel more comfortable, that's wonderful. But I won't charge you for basic human kindness." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Here was a man who made in a year what she spent on a single handbag. And he was refusing payment for giving her daughter what she needed most: understanding and acceptance. "Then what do you want?" Victoria asked, her voice breaking. "What would make this worth your time?" Daniel looked at Tommy and Sophia, who had moved to sit on the floor near the aquarium. Tommy was teaching Sophia how to identify the different types of fish by their swimming patterns, and she was absorbing every word with rapt attention. "I want Tommy to have opportunities I can't give him," Daniel said finally. "He's brilliant with technology, but we can't afford computer classes or coding camps. If you really want to help us, help him reach his potential." Victoria nodded immediately. "Done. Full computer tutoring, coding classes, whatever he needs. And college tuition, when the time comes." "Mrs. Whitmore," Daniel said, his voice almost pleading, "you can't just throw money at this. That's not how real relationships work." "Then teach me," Victoria said desperately. "Teach me how to be the mother Sophia needs, instead of the mother I think she should have." For a long moment, Daniel studied her face. Victoria could see him weighing her words, trying to determine if her desperation was genuine or just another form of manipulation. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this my way. No schedules, no progress reports, no measuring success by your corporate standards. We follow Sophia's lead, not yours." "Agreed," Victoria said immediately. "And if at any point Tommy or Sophia becomes uncomfortable, we stop. No questions, no negotiations." "Understood." Daniel stood up and extended his hand. When Victoria shook it, she felt calluses from years of manual labor against her soft palm. It was a reminder of how different their worlds were and how much she had to learn. "When do we start?" Victoria asked. "How about right now?" Daniel suggested. "Tommy and I were going to grab dinner from the food truck downstairs. Sophia could join us if she wants." Victoria's automatic response was to refuse. Sophia didn't eat street food. She had dietary restrictions and sensitivities, and she needed to maintain her routine. But looking at her daughter, who was practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of continuing her conversation with Tommy, Victoria bit back her objections. "Sophia," Victoria said carefully, "would you like to go to dinner with Tommy and Mr. Chen?" Sophia looked up from the floor, her eyes bright. "Could we sit outside? Sometimes the fish sounds follow me inside other places." "Of course," Daniel said immediately. "We always eat outside, when the weather's nice. Fresh air makes everything taste better." As they prepared to leave, Victoria realized she was about to do something she hadn't done in years. Trust someone else to take care of her daughter. The thought terrified her. But watching Sophia's animated conversation with Tommy, she knew she had to try. Because for the first time in months, her daughter looked happy. And if a single father cleaned buildings for a living could achieve that in 30 minutes, maybe everything Victoria thought she knew about parenting was wrong. Maybe the answer wasn't more money, or better specialists, or perfect routines. Maybe it was simply finding someone who saw Sophia as a whole person rather than a problem to be solved. As they walked toward the elevator, Victoria heard Tommy ask Sophia, "Do you want to know a secret? About loud places? I'll teach you my invisible shield technique." Sophia nodded eagerly, and Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The real test, she knew, was just beginning. The food truck parked outside Whitmore Industries served Korean barbecue tacos to office workers who wanted something more interesting than another corporate lunch. Victoria had walked past it hundreds of times without giving it a second thought. Now, sitting at a plastic picnic table on the sidewalk, she watched her daughter eat street food with genuine enthusiasm for the first time in months. Sophia had insisted on sitting with her back to the building, claiming the glass windows made echo sounds that hurt her ears. Tommy had immediately understood, positioning himself so he could help shield her from the street noise. They sat close together, comparing the different textures of their food and discussing which sounds were sharp versus soft. "The lettuce makes a good crunch," Sophia observed, biting into her taco carefully. "Not scary loud like chips. More like stepping on leaves." "Exactly," Tommy agreed. "I rate food sounds on a scale of 1 to 10. Lettuce is like a 4. Potato chips are definitely a 9. Victoria found herself taking notes on her phone, documenting every interaction. This was how her mind worked: analyze, categorize, look for patterns she could replicate. But Daniel noticed immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "you don't need to study this like a business presentation. Just watch your daughter be happy." The gentle correction stung because it was accurate. Victoria put her phone away and forced herself to simply observe. Sophia was animated in a way Victoria hadn't seen since before her autism diagnosis. She was asking questions, making connections, even initiating conversation, all because a 12-year-old boy was treating her like a regular kid instead of a collection of symptoms. "Tommy?" Sophia said suddenly. "Do you ever wish your brain worked like other kids' brains?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria held her breath, afraid of how Tommy might answer. Tommy considered this seriously, chewing his taco while he thought. "Sometimes," he admitted, "like when I can't understand why people say one thing but mean something else, or when I get overwhelmed in crowded places and everyone thinks I'm being dramatic." "Yes," Sophia said emphatically. "People always think I'm being dramatic too, but it really does hurt when sounds are too loud." "I know," Tommy said simply. "And you're not dramatic. You're just honest about how things feel. Most people lie about that stuff." Victoria felt tears threatening again. In 2 sentences, this child had given Sophia more validation than years of therapy sessions. Daniel caught her expression and leaned closer. "Tommy went through a phase where he hated being autistic," he said softly. "He wanted to be normal so badly that he tried to hide his stims and force himself to tolerate sensory overload. It made everything worse." "What changed?" Victoria asked. "He met other autistic kids online. Older kids who'd learned to see their autism as a difference, not a defect. They taught him that accommodating your needs isn't cheating, it's self-care." Victoria watched Tommy show Sophia how he used his fingers to create a volume dial for overwhelming sounds, imagining that he could turn down the noise when it got too intense. It was such a simple coping mechanism, but Sophia was absorbing it, like she'd discovered buried treasure. "How did you learn all this?" Victoria asked Daniel. "The sensory strategies, the validation techniques. Did you take classes?" Daniel laughed, but not unkindly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I stock shelves at a grocery store on weekends and clean office buildings at night. I learned this stuff because I had to. When Tommy was first diagnosed, I spent every free minute reading autism blogs, watching YouTube videos, lurking in parent support groups online. But the specialists I've hired have degrees from the best schools, and they're probably very good at understanding autism in general." Daniel interrupted gently. "But I only needed to understand one autistic kid. My kid. That's a much smaller target." The distinction hit Victoria like a revelation. She had been seeking universal solutions when what Sophia needed was individual understanding. She had been trying to fix her daughter's autism when she should have been learning to support Sophia as an autistic person. "Mr. Chen," Victoria said carefully, "would you be willing to teach me? Not as a consultant or employee, but as one parent helping another?" Daniel studied her face for a long moment. "Are you sure you want to learn? Because it means admitting that some of your instincts about parenting might be wrong. It means accepting that Sophia doesn't need to be cured or fixed or made normal. She just needs to be understood." Victoria looked at her daughter, who was now teaching Tommy how to identify the different musical notes in the street sounds around them. Sophia's face was bright with concentration and joy. "Yes," Victoria said firmly. "I'm sure." Over the next 3 weeks, Victoria's carefully structured world began to unravel in the best possible way. Daniel and Tommy started coming to the Whitmore Industries building every Tuesday and Thursday evening. What began as informal visits evolved into something Victoria couldn't quite name. Not therapy, not tutoring, but a kind of patient re-education in understanding her own daughter. The first lesson was sensory mapping. Tommy taught Sophia how to identify her sensory triggers throughout Victoria's office, and together they created solutions that didn't require expensive equipment or professional interventions. The humming aquarium got moved to the outer reception area. Victoria's fluorescent desk lamp was replaced with warm LED bulbs. They hung blackout curtains that Sophia could close when the afternoon sunlight became overwhelming. Small changes that cost less than a single therapy session, but made Sophia's environment genuinely comfortable. Victoria found herself learning alongside her daughter. She discovered that Sophia's stubbornness about wearing certain clothes wasn't defiance. It was genuine physical discomfort with specific textures. She learned that Sophia's tendency to repeat questions wasn't attention-seeking behavior, but a way of processing information that came too fast, or felt too overwhelming. "Routine isn't about controlling Sophia," Daniel explained one evening as they watched the kids build an elaborate marble run from office supplies. "It's about giving her a predictable framework so she can use her mental energy for learning and connecting instead of constantly trying to figure out what's expected of her." Victoria had been forcing Sophia to be flexible, thinking it would help her adapt to the real world. Instead, she had been creating constant anxiety that made everything harder. The breakthrough came during their 3rd week together. Victoria had been working late on a presentation for a board meeting, stress levels high, when Sophia had what looked like the beginning of a meltdown. The sound of Victoria's rapid typing, combined with the late afternoon traffic noise outside, had pushed Sophia past her tolerance threshold. In the past, Victoria would have tried to distract Sophia or rush her through the feelings. This time, following Daniel's guidance, she stopped what she was doing and sat on the floor beside her daughter. "It's too much noise right now, isn't it?" Victoria said calmly. Sophia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Would it help if we made it quieter?" Another nod. Victoria closed her laptop, drew the curtains, and turned off the overhead lights. Then she sat quietly beside Sophia, not trying to fix anything, just being present while her daughter's nervous system reset itself. After 10 minutes, Sophia's breathing calmed. She leaned against Victoria's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for making it quiet." It was such a small thing, but for Victoria, it felt like discovering a new language, one she should have been fluent in years ago. "I'm starting to understand," Victoria told Daniel that evening, why traditional approaches didn't work. They were trying to change Sophia instead of changing her environment. "Exactly," Daniel said. "Tommy taught me that accommodating his needs isn't indulging him or making him weak. It's giving him the support he needs to be successful. Just like you wouldn't expect someone who needs glasses to strain their eyes instead of wearing corrective lenses." Victoria nodded, But something in Daniel's tone made her curious. "You sound like you learned that lesson the hard way." Daniel's expression grew complicated. "When Tommy was first diagnosed, I thought I had to choose between accepting his autism and wanting him to have a normal life. I pushed him too hard to fit in, to mask his stimming, to tolerate sensory input that was genuinely painful for him." If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. What happened? He shut down completely. Stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I almost lost him because I was so focused on making him appear normal that I forgot to help him be happy. The pain in Daniel's voice was raw and immediate. Victoria realized that beneath his patient wisdom was a father who had made mistakes and learned from them. It made his guidance feel more authentic, less like judgment. "How did you rebuild trust with him?" Victoria asked. "I apologized," Daniel said simply. "I told him I was wrong to try to change who he was instead of changing how the world treated him. And then I spent 6 months proving it by following his lead instead of forcing him to follow mine." Victoria thought about all the times she had apologized to Sophia for meltdowns or behaviors, but had never apologized for misunderstanding her needs. There was a difference, she was beginning to realize, between saying sorry for consequences and saying sorry for fundamental misunderstanding. That night, after Daniel and Tommy had gone home, Victoria sat with Sophia during her bedtime routine. Instead of rushing through the process, she followed Sophia's lead, letting her daughter arrange her stuffed animals in the specific order that felt right. Waiting patiently while Sophia checked that her nightlight was positioned exactly where she needed it. "Sophia," Victoria said as she tucked her daughter into bed, "I owe you an apology." Sophia looked up with curious eyes. "I've been trying to help you by changing things about how you act and how you respond to the world. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand the difference." Sophia was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said, "Tommy told me that good parents make mistakes, but they learn from them. Are you learning, Mama?" "I'm trying very hard to learn," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "And Tommy is a very wise boy." "He is," Sophia agreed. "And his daddy is teaching you how to be a better mama, just like Tommy is teaching me how to be proud of my different brain." The phrase hit Victoria like a physical blow. Proud of her different brain. When had Victoria last felt proud of her daughter's neurodivergence? When had she stopped seeing autism as something to overcome and started seeing it as simply part of who Sophia was? Over the following days, Victoria began to notice things about Sophia that had been overshadowed by her focus on deficits. Her daughter had an extraordinary memory for patterns and details. She could remember conversations word for word from weeks ago. She approached problems with a logical precision that reminded Victoria of herself in boardroom negotiations. More importantly, Sophia was funny. She made observations about the world that were startlingly insightful and often hilarious. Victoria realized she had been so focused on Sophia's struggles that she had stopped appreciating her daughter's remarkable mind. The transformation wasn't just in how Victoria saw Sophia, but in how she saw herself as a mother. She began to trust her instincts more and rely on expert opinions less. She started asking Sophia directly what she needed, instead of assuming she knew better. And slowly, their relationship began to heal. If you're finding yourself moved by this story of a mother learning to truly see her daughter, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Your support means everything and helps us bring you more stories of connection, understanding, and the power of looking beyond first impressions. But their progress wasn't happening in a vacuum. Victoria's assistant, Margaret, had been watching these changes with growing concern. And Victoria's sister-in-law, Patricia Whitmore, had been hearing reports about Victoria's unprofessional behavior from building security staff who noticed her eating street food with a janitor and his son. It was only a matter of time before their fragile new world would face its first real test. That test came on a Thursday evening in early October. Victoria was working late again, but this time by choice rather than compulsion. Sophia was contentedly organizing Victoria's pen collection by color gradients, while Tommy showed her coding basics on his father's old laptop. Daniel was quietly restocking the paper towels in the executive bathroom when Patricia Whitmore stepped off the elevator unannounced. Patricia was everything Victoria had once thought she wanted to be: perfectly polished, socially connected, and absolutely convinced that she knew what was best for everyone around her. "Victoria," Patricia announced, striding into the office without knocking. "We need to talk about what's happening here." Victoria looked up from the quarterly reports she'd been reviewing. "Hello, Patricia. What brings you here so late?" "I'm here," Patricia said, her voice sharp with disapproval, "because I've been hearing disturbing things about your judgment lately." Sophia looked up from her pen organization immediately, sensing the tension in the room. Tommy's fingers stilled on his keyboard. Both children went quiet in the way kids do when they sense adult conflict brewing. "What disturbing things?" Victoria asked, her voice carefully controlled. Patricia gestured toward Daniel, who had emerged from the bathroom and was standing uncertainly near the doorway. "Building staff report that you've been socializing with employees, eating street food with the cleaning crew, allowing unauthorized children into corporate spaces." "Daniel isn't just any employee," Victoria said evenly, "and his son Tommy has been helping Sophia." "Helping her? How?" Patricia interrupted. "By enabling her behaviors instead of correcting them?" "Victoria, I know you're struggling with Sophia's condition, but this isn't the answer." The word condition made Sophia flinch visibly. Victoria saw her daughter's hands start to flutter, a sign that she was becoming overwhelmed. "Patricia," Victoria said, her voice taking on the steel she usually reserved for hostile board meetings. "I'm going to ask you to lower your voice and watch your language." "My language?" Patricia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Victoria, you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You cannot be seen fraternizing with the janitorial staff. It undermines your authority and makes you look desperate." Daniel stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, I should go. This seems like a family matter." "No," Victoria said firmly. "Please stay. Patricia, anything you want to say to me, you can say in front of Daniel." Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. "Fine. I'll be direct. Your board of directors asked me to check on you because they're concerned about your decision-making lately. Missed meetings, shortened workdays, unconventional childcare arrangements. They're questioning your commitment to the company." Victoria felt ice form in her stomach. "The board sent you to spy on me?" "They sent me to help you see reason," Patricia corrected. "Victoria, you're brilliant at business, but you're failing as a mother. Sophia needs professional help, not amateur hour with the maintenance staff." The words hit Victoria like physical blows, but what made them truly devastating was the grain of truth in them. Victoria had been missing meetings. She had been leaving work early to spend time with Sophia. She had been prioritizing her daughter over her company in ways that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. But as she looked at Sophia, who was now quietly stimming with her hands while watching the adult conversation with fearful eyes, Victoria realized something crucial. For the first time in her daughter's life, Victoria was actually being a mother instead of a CEO who happened to have a child. "Patricia," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest, "I want you to leave." Victoria, I want you to leave now, Victoria repeated, her voice rising slightly. And I want you to tell the board that my decisions about Sophia are not open for corporate review. Patricia's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. A very expensive mistake. When the board loses confidence in your leadership, when the company suffers because you're distracted by personal matters, don't say I didn't warn you. She turned on her heel and left, her expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. In the silence that followed, Sophia's hands were flapping more rapidly. Tommy scooted closer to her on the floor. Want to try the finger-counting thing? He asked quietly. Sometimes it helps when grown-ups are loud. Sophia nodded, and Tommy began showing her the coping technique again. Daniel watched them for a moment, then turned to Victoria. Mrs. Whitmore, he said gently, are you going to be all right? Victoria looked at her daughter, who was gradually calming down with Tommy's patient help. She looked at Daniel, whose concern for her family was genuine and unselfish. Then she thought about Patricia's threats and the board's disapproval. For her entire adult life, Victoria had made decisions based on what was professionally advantageous. She had built her company by always choosing profit over personal comfort, efficiency over emotion, success over sentiment. But watching her daughter learn to manage her anxiety with help from a friend who truly understood her, Victoria realized that some things were more important than board approval. Yes, she said finally, I'm going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. Because, for the first time in years, Victoria knew exactly who she was choosing to be. And it wasn't the CEO that Patricia and the board expected. It was Sophia's mother. And that was enough. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on Monday morning. Victoria arrived at the Whitmore Industries conference room 15 minutes early, her stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She had spent the weekend thinking about Patricia's threats and what they might mean for her family's future. The boardroom was exactly as she had designed it 5 years ago. Intimidating, austere, built to project power and control. 12 leather chairs arranged around a polished mahogany table that cost more than most people's cars. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, positioned so the person at the head of the table would be backlit like a figure of authority. Victoria had always sat at that head chair. Today, she wondered if she would leave this room still entitled to it. Richard Blackstone, the board chairman, was already seated when she entered. So was Patricia, looking smugly confident in her designer suit. The other board members filed in over the next few minutes, titans of industry who had helped build Whitmore Pharmaceuticals into a global powerhouse. Victoria, Richard began without preamble, we need to address some concerns that have been brought to our attention. Victoria sat perfectly straight, drawing on years of corporate training. What concerns specifically? Patricia leaned forward. Your recent behavior has been increasingly erratic, missing board meetings, leaving work early. And most concerning of all, your inappropriate relationship with building maintenance staff. Inappropriate how? Victoria asked coolly. You've been allowing unauthorized individuals into secure corporate spaces, said Margaret Chen, the chief financial officer. Your daughter and a janitor's son have been observed in your office after hours, with access to confidential materials. Tommy is 12 years old, Victoria replied. I hardly think he's engaging in corporate espionage. That's not the point, Richard interjected. The point is judgment, Victoria. Professional boundaries. The appearance of impropriety. Victoria looked around the table at faces she had known for years. These people had supported her rise to CEO, had trusted her, with billions of dollars in corporate assets. Their disappointment was palpable, but for the first time, Victoria found herself questioning whether their approval was worth what she would have to sacrifice to keep it. "Let me be clear about what's actually happening," Victoria said, her voice steady. "I've been learning how to be a better mother to my autistic daughter. That process has required me to seek guidance from someone who has successfully raised an autistic child. The fact that this person happens to work as a janitor seems to be the real issue here." Patricia's eyes flashed. "Don't make this about class warfare, Victoria. This is about your fitness to lead a Fortune 500 company." "Is it?" Victoria asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, this feels like punishment for prioritizing my child's well-being over corporate expectations." Richard cleared his throat. "Victoria! No one is questioning your love for Sophia, but leadership requires sacrifice. It requires putting the company's needs ahead of personal convenience." The word convenience hit Victoria like a slap. Her daughter's autism wasn't a convenience issue. It was a fundamental part of who Sophia was. And learning to support her properly wasn't a distraction from Victoria's real responsibilities. It was one of her most important responsibilities. "Gentlemen, ladies," Victoria said, standing up slowly, "I want to tell you about my daughter." "Victoria," Patricia began. "No," Victoria said firmly. "You've made this about Sophia. So let's talk about Sophia. 3 months ago, my 8-year-old daughter was so overwhelmed by her sensory environment that she couldn't function in basic social situations. She was labeled unmanageable by every specialist I hired. She was refused admission to schools that had previously courted my donations." The room went quiet. Victoria rarely spoke about personal matters in corporate settings. "I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on treatments and therapies that failed," Victoria continued. "Not because they were poorly designed, but because they were trying to change my daughter, instead of helping her thrive as the person she actually is." She began to pace, her voice gaining strength. "Then, a janitor's 12-year-old son spent 30 minutes with Sophia and accomplished something all those expensive specialists couldn't. He saw her as a complete person worthy of respect and accommodation, not a problem to be solved." Margaret Chen shifted uncomfortably. "Victoria, we understand your gratitude." "But do you?" Victoria interrupted. "Because 3 months ago, Sophia couldn't sit through a dinner without having a meltdown. Last week, she gave me a presentation about the different types of fish in my office aquarium, complete with hand-drawn charts and detailed observations. She's not just managing her autism anymore, she's thriving with it." The transformation Victoria was describing was impossible to dismiss. "Even Patricia looked uncertain now. "The man you're so concerned about," Victoria continued, "Daniel Chen, has taught me more about leadership in 3 months than I learned in my entire MBA program. He's shown me that real authority doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from understanding them well enough to help them succeed." Richard frowned. "That's admirable, Victoria. But how does this relate to running a pharmaceutical company?" Victoria smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, she felt completely in control. "Last month, I had dinner with the Chief Executive Officer of Jameson Healthcare. He mentioned that their Autism Research Division has been struggling to recruit families for clinical trials. Apparently, parents don't trust pharmaceutical companies to understand their children's needs." The board members exchanged glances. Jameson Healthcare was their biggest potential acquisition target. "I told him about Sophia's progress," Victoria continued, "and about the community-based approaches that Daniel introduced me to. He was fascinated. It turns out that involving actual autistic people and their families in drug development produces better outcomes than traditional top-down research models." Patricia's confidence was beginning to crack. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Victoria said, returning to her seat, "that my personal experience with autism isn't a distraction from my professional responsibilities. It's a competitive advantage. She pulled out a folder she had prepared over the weekend. I've been developing a proposal for a new research initiative, community-partnered autism research, led by autistic individuals and their families, supported by corporate resources. Jameson wants to pilot the program as part of our acquisition discussions. Richard leaned forward, his business instincts engaged. What kind of investment are we talking about? Initial funding of $50 million over 3 years, Victoria said. But the potential market for autism-related therapeutics and supports is projected to reach $15 billion by 2030. The numbers spoke a language the board understood. Margaret Chen was already taking notes. The best part, Victoria continued, is that this approach doesn't require us to guess what autistic people need. We ask them directly. We include them as partners instead of treating them as subjects. Patricia made one last attempt to regain control. Victoria, this is a lovely story. But you still haven't addressed the core issue. Your relationship with the janitor is unprofessional and undermines your credibility. Victoria looked directly at Patricia, her voice cool and clear. My relationship with Daniel Chen is a professional consultation with a subject matter expert. The fact that he also happens to clean our building says more about our hiring practices than it does about his qualifications. She paused, letting that sink in. Daniel has a bachelor's degree in special education and 15 years of experience supporting autistic children. He works as a janitor because he needed flexible hours to care for his son as a single parent. If we had properly valued his expertise from the beginning, he might be running our research division instead of emptying our trash cans. The room went completely silent. Victoria had just accused them all of systemic classism, and they knew she was right. Richard cleared his throat. What exactly are you proposing, Victoria? I'm proposing that we hire Daniel Chen as a consultant for our new autism research initiative. I'm proposing that we stop pretending corporate success and family success are mutually exclusive. And I'm proposing that if this board cannot support a CEO who prioritizes both excellence and humanity, then perhaps you need a different CEO. The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria was calling their bluff, betting that her value to the company outweighed their discomfort with her choices. Patricia looked around the table desperately. You can't be serious. She's threatening to quit over a janitor. I'm not threatening anything, Victoria said calmly. I'm clarifying my priorities. Sophia is my daughter, and supporting her properly is non-negotiable. If that makes me unfit to lead this company, then I'll find another way to use my skills. Margaret Chen spoke first. The Jameson deal is worth $2 billion. If this autism research initiative could strengthen that relationship, it could, Victoria said. But only if we commit to doing it authentically. That means treating autistic people and their families as partners, not subjects. It means acknowledging that expertise comes from lived experience, not just academic credentials. Richard was quiet for a long moment, obviously weighing options. Finally, he spoke. Victoria, I want to see a full proposal for this research initiative. Budget projections, staffing plans, partnership structures, everything. You'll have it by Friday, Victoria said immediately. And I want to meet this Daniel Chen personally, Richard continued. If we're going to make him a face of our autism research, I need to understand what we're working with. Victoria felt a flutter of anxiety. Daniel had no idea this conversation was happening. She would need to ask him to undergo the kind of scrutiny he had never signed up for. I'll arrange that, Victoria said. Patricia made one final attempt. Richard, you can't seriously be considering— Patricia, Richard interrupted. Your concerns have been noted. But Victoria is right about one thing. If this research initiative succeeds, it positions us as leaders in a growing market. Sometimes innovation requires challenging conventional approaches. The meeting concluded, with Victoria still in her position, but with new expectations and obligations. As the board members filed out, Patricia lingered. "This isn't over, Victoria," she said quietly. "If this autism project fails, if your janitor embarrasses us in front of Jameson, the board will remember that I tried to warn them." Victoria met her gaze steadily. "And if it succeeds, Patricia, the board will remember that you tried to stop it." That evening, Victoria sat in her office with Daniel and Tommy, explaining what had happened at the board meeting. Sophia was on the floor nearby, working on a complex jigsaw puzzle that Tommy had brought her. "Let me make sure I understand," Daniel said slowly. "You told your board of directors that you wanted to hire me to consult on a $50 million research program." "Yes," Victoria said. "And you did this without asking me first." "Yes." "Mrs. Whitmore," Daniel said, running his hands through his hair, "I clean office buildings. I don't know anything about running corporate research programs." "You know everything about supporting an autistic child," Victoria replied. "You know what works and what doesn't. You understand the difference between helping and fixing. That's exactly the expertise we need." Tommy looked up from the floor where he was helping Sophia with her puzzle. "Dad, remember what you always tell me about imposter syndrome?" Daniel sighed. "That's different, Tommy." "No, it's not," Tommy said firmly. "You tell me that just because something feels too big doesn't mean I'm not qualified for it. You tell me that autism gives me perspectives that other people don't have." Sophia nodded seriously. "Tommy's dad knows more about autism than all my doctors combined. And he's nicer." Victoria watched Daniel's expression shift as he absorbed his son's words and Sophia's endorsement. She could see him wrestling with self-doubt and the fear of being exposed as inadequate. "Daniel," Victoria said gently, "I'm not asking you to pretend to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, a parent who figured out how to help his autistic child thrive. That experience is worth more than any degree." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. If I do this, I have conditions." "Of course," Victoria said. "First, Tommy's well-being comes first. If this job interferes with my ability to be his father, I'm out." "Agreed." "Second, I want creative control over how we approach families. No corporate manipulation, no false promises, no treating people like research subjects." "Absolutely." "And third," Daniel said, his voice growing stronger, "I want to hire other autistic adults and autism parents as consultants. Real diversity of perspectives, not just tokenism." Victoria smiled. "Done. Anything else?" "Yes," Daniel said, looking directly at her. "I want you to promise that when this gets difficult, and it will get difficult, you won't throw me under the bus to save your corporate reputation." The request was fair, but painful. Victoria realized that Daniel had no reason to trust her completely. She was still the billionaire CEO who could ruin his life with a phone call. "Daniel," Victoria said, "3 months ago, I would have promised you anything to get what I wanted. Today, I can promise you this. Sophia's happiness depends on your friendship with our family. I will never do anything that jeopardizes that." Daniel studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Mrs. Whitmore, let's change how the world thinks about autism." 2 weeks later, the Jameson healthcare executives arrived at Whitmore Industries for their first meeting about the Autism Research Partnership. Victoria had prepared meticulously. but she was still nervous about how they would react to Daniel's unconventional background. The conference room had been transformed for the occasion. Instead of the usual corporate setup, Daniel had suggested arranging the space to be sensory-friendly, softer lighting, comfortable seating options, noise-dampening materials. It was a small change, but it sent a clear message about their priorities. Dr. James Jameson, the chief executive officer, entered with 3 colleagues and immediately noticed the modifications. "Interesting room design," he commented. "We want to make sure our meetings are accessible to everyone," Victoria replied, "including the autistic consultants who'll be joining us today. Right on schedule." Daniel entered with 2 other adults, Maria Santos, an autistic research scientist, and David Kim, a father of 3 autistic children who had started a successful advocacy organization. Victoria made the introductions, watching carefully for any signs of discomfort or skepticism from the Jameson team. To her relief, Dr. Jameson seemed genuinely interested in meeting the consultants. "Mr. Chen, Dr. Jameson said, "Victoria tells me you've developed some innovative approaches to autism support. I'd love to hear about them." Daniel had spent hours preparing for this moment, but Victoria could see his nervousness. Then Sophia's voice came from the corner of the room, where she was quietly working on her laptop. "Mr. Chen taught me that my autism isn't broken," Sophia said clearly. "It's just different. Like how some people need glasses to see better." "Doctor, about—" Jameson looked surprised to see a child in the corporate meeting, but his expression softened immediately. "That's a wonderful way to think about it. You must be Sophia." "I am," Sophia said proudly. "I'm helping with the research too. I'm going to interview other autistic kids about what makes them happy and what makes them sad." The simple honesty of her words seemed to shift the entire energy in the room. "Doctor?" Jameson knelt down to Sophia's level. "That sounds like very important work," he said seriously. "What have you learned so far?" Nah, that most doctors don't ask us what we actually need," Sophia replied. "They just guess. But Tommy's dad always asks first." Victoria felt her heart swell with pride. Her daughter had just articulated the core philosophy of their research approach with the clarity that only a child could bring. The meeting proceeded better than Victoria had dared to hope. Daniel presented their community partnership model with growing confidence, supported by Maria's research expertise and David's advocacy experience. The Jameson team asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely excited about the collaborative approach. By the end of the 2-hour session, Dr. Jameson was ready to move forward with the partnership. "This is exactly what our industry needs," he told Victoria as they shook hands. "Research that starts with listening instead of assuming. You've created something special here." After the Jameson team left, Victoria found herself alone with Daniel in the conference room. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing what had just happened. "We did it," Daniel said finally, his voice filled with wonder. "We actually convinced them to take autistic voices seriously." Victoria nodded, but she could see something else in Daniel's expression. "What are you thinking about?" "3 months ago, I was just trying to find reliable childcare so I could work my night shifts," Daniel said. "Now I'm designing corporate research programs. It feels surreal. 3 months ago, I thought I was failing as a mother because I couldn't make my daughter act normal," Victoria replied. "Now I understand that the problem was never Sophia. It was a world that didn't know how to appreciate who she really is." They looked through the conference room windows at the city, spread below them. Somewhere out there were thousands of families dealing with autism diagnoses, struggling with the same challenges Victoria and Daniel had faced. "Do you think we can really make a difference?" Victoria asked. Daniel smiled. I think we already have. Look at Sophia and Tommy. They're growing up in a world where they know their autism is valued, not just tolerated. That's going to change everything for them. And for other kids like them, Victoria added. Exactly, Daniel said. We're not just changing research protocols, we're changing the conversation. Victoria thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The broken crystal vase, the emergency board meeting, the threat of losing everything she had built. All of it had been necessary to tear down the walls she had constructed around herself and her understanding of success. Daniel, Victoria said, I need to tell you something. What's that? When I offered to pay you double your salary to handle Sophia for 1 hour, I thought I was hiring someone to fix my problem. I didn't realize I was inviting someone to fix my life. Daniel laughed softly. You didn't hire me to fix anything. Mrs. Whitmore, you gave me the chance to use my experience to help another family. That's not the same thing at all. Victoria nodded, understanding the distinction. She hadn't bought Daniel's expertise. She had earned his partnership by proving she was willing to learn and change. 6 months later, the Whitmore-Jameson Autism Research Collaborative had enrolled its first 50 families in community-partnered studies. The program was already generating interest from other pharmaceutical companies and research institutions. More importantly, for Victoria, Sophia was thriving. She had started at a new school that valued neurodiversity and provided appropriate supports. She had made friends, real friends, who appreciated her unique perspective and included her in their activities. Tommy had enrolled in advanced computer programming classes and was already talking about studying software engineering in college. His confidence had grown along with his skills, and he served as a peer mentor for other autistic students. And Daniel had discovered talents he never knew he possessed. His combination of lived experience and intuitive understanding of human needs made him a natural researcher and advocate. He was already being recruited by other organizations who wanted to replicate their model. On a warm spring evening, Victoria stood in her office, watching Sophia and Tommy work together on a coding project. They were building an app designed to help autistic kids navigate sensory challenges in new environments. A practical application of everything they had learned about accommodation and self-advocacy. Daniel joined her at the window, holding 2 cups of coffee from the food truck that still parked outside their building. Remember when you thought this was impossible? He asked, handing her a cup. Victoria laughed. I remember when I thought normal was the goal. And now? Now I know that normal is overrated, Victoria said. Happy is much more important. Through the window, they watched Sophia explain a coding concept to Tommy with animated gestures and obvious joy. Her different open-stride brain. The brain, Victoria had once seen as damaged, was creating solutions that could help thousands of other children. You know what the best part is? Victoria said. What's that? I finally understand what you meant when you said you couldn't take my money for basic human kindness. You weren't being noble. And you were teaching me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought. Daniel smiled. And what did you learn? Victoria looked at her daughter, brilliant and beautiful and perfectly herself, and felt a contentment she had never experienced in any boardroom victory. I learned that success isn't about having all the answers, Victoria said. It's about being brave enough to ask better questions. Outside, the food truck's evening customers included executives and janitors, parents and children, all sharing the same sidewalk space with easy equality. It was a small thing, but it represented something larger. A world where value was measured by character, rather than status. Where differences were celebrated, rather than corrected. Victoria had started this journey trying to fix her daughter. Instead, she had discovered that the only thing that needed fixing was her own understanding of what it meant to love someone exactly as they are. And that, she realized, was the most important lesson any parent could learn. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story. Sometimes the most profound changes happen not when we try to fix others, but when we finally allow ourselves to be transformed by love.